Hello and welcome to the Northwood Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Heath Jones, pastor of Northwood Christian Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. If you'd like to learn more about us, please visit our website at www.indyncc.org. Or, preferably for me, and perhaps maybe for you, a more direct route would be better. And you can email me straight away at heath@indyncc.org. That's Heath, my name, at indyncc.org. And I'd love to learn more about our listeners. I frankly don't know who, if anyone is listening, so I'd like to know. I'd hope that you'd like to learn more about us. Before I move on, I'll address the background noise you may be hearing or maybe not here and there. If you've been listening for a while, you'll know that we host a couple of schools and a daycare here at Northwood. So what you might hear in the background is the sound of children in the middle of their school day, which might involve shouting, basketballs bouncing, feet pounding on the floor. So apologies in advance for the noise. About this podcast. It's made by me, but produced and distributed by the All Indiana Podcast Network. And you've heard me talk about it before, or perhaps not. If you're new around here, you need to know that the All Indiana Podcast Network produces podcasts made in Indiana by Hoosiers. It's just a funny word that we call ourselves here in Indiana, Hoosiers. These podcasts, they cover a variety of topics. And for more, please check them out at wishtv.com/podcasts. That's wishtv.com/podcasts. Last, please stop this video or podcast and like, subscribe, or follow us by way of whatever app or format you are listening or watching this recording if you haven't done so already. These points of contact will help us reach more people. So please pause this, like, subscribe, or follow. As I said, if you haven't done so already, please, that would help us out a great deal and we'd be very grateful. Now, here in a moment, we'll be going over a passage that's found in Matthew chapter 16, but first we need to pause for some ads for our podcast, our listening audience. And so we'll catch some of you after these ads. And we're back. And as I was saying, today we'll be going over a Bible passage found in Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 20 to be specific. That's Matthew 16, verses 13 through 20. And without further delay, here goes. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. This passage often gets reduced to some glorified pop quiz, one where Peter raises his hand when Jesus asks the question with just the right answer, when in fact, so much more is behind this story. In fact, it's quite evocative, and we'll get into that as we go forward. But one of the great obstacles to understanding this story is that many people are unaware of the power dynamics in Jesus' day. If you've been around here for some time, you know that we have talked about the power dynamics and the political struggles around Jesus in his time. But basically, what you ought to know, if you don't already, is that Rome ruled the roost. Consequently, some of Roman assumptions were, we are the best, the Roman Empire says, and our ways are the best. And therefore, they put their brand on everything. And it was in this context that Jesus would say things like, the last will be first and the first will be last. This would be nonsense as far as the Romans were concerned, or the Roman authorities. For they were indisputably first, as far as they could see, now and they thought for all time. And just a few lines later, in a passage that we'll consider next week, in next week's episode, Jesus tells the disciples that those who want to save their lives will lose them, and those who lose their lives for the sake of Jesus and his cause and all that he signifies will find life. It's found in the 25th verse of this very chapter, Matthew 16. And more on that next week, but I only bring it up to point out that this is big-time loser talk as far as the Roman Empire that had subjugated Israel, Palestine. As far as they're concerned, this is big-time loser talk. And Jesus would go on and share some more of his thoughts that many would have found foolish in his day, when he said things like, "What good is it if you gain the whole world but lose your life?" That's from the 26th verse of the same chapter. In other words, what good is it to put your life force to work towards the procuring of all that is in this world, the material goods? And some would answer, "What good do you say? Have you seen my house? Very good indeed." All of the dialogue we read earlier is happening in sight of just one of the many temples built in the emperor's honor, the emperor of Rome. And what you had there was a shrine or a temple built by Rome, and its presence signified Rome's might and rule in that area. It was like a signpost that said, "We are in charge." And it's being dedicated to the Caesar is meant to elevate Rome's rule to divine status. The local ruler, then wanting to get in on the action, will put their own name on the thing, binding his person to the values and the prosperous ways of Rome. So the local ruler in Jesus' day was named Philip, as we see in the text. And so the place was named Caesarea Philippi, or after this man named Philip. So here you have a network of people who are literally gaining the world by way of riding Rome's coattails. And that's what this local ruler Philip was doing. And all of this to say, says Jesus, what good is it? You don't even have to guess at the response of many to this question when Jesus would say, what good is all of this? By the time Jesus was born, the Roman Empire had taken claim to all of the quote-unquote civilized world in that area, and all that was known to people in that region, at least of what they thought of as civilized cultures. So Rome was winning from their perspective, and Jesus has the nerve to ask in that context, when they're on the height of their power, what good is all of this? I mean, from the Roman perspective, just look at it. It's everything. We have everything. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. I just want to give some context to the place where Peter makes his famous confession here in this text. It's a place that screams at everyone who walks by that the king of Rome is also a god. That's what the temple in the area would signify. In fact, the Caesar was called, get this, Son of God. It was even on some of the currency. And now you know why Rome started freaking out when people started calling Jesus the Son of God. And all of those whose wealth and power were procured by way of interacting with Caesar as God and were bound to the system of oppression and its economy, all of them who were benefiting from the system and would struggle without it, well, they saw incentive to keep it in place or to participate in the first place. Of all of this, biblical scholar, the late biblical scholar, rest in peace, Clark Williamson writes, "This is why the people were willing to go to temples like this one to make sacrifices to the Caesar, thus solidifying their loyalty to not only the king, but to the ways of the kingdom. Rome was meant to be seen as an image of a divine realm, and the Caesar was the one who was seen to birth it. Augustus was called God and Savior, and his birth was said to have signaled the beginning of good news, or evangelion, for the world." That's from Clark Williamson, end quote. Interaction with people at places like Roman temples, such as the one at Caesarea Philippi, and on Caesar's terms, was a way that you might buy some purchase power into that system. If you were especially fortunate, you might just be given the keys to that kingdom, perhaps working your way into a high governmental position or posting, by way of gaining influence, or maybe just find a better niche in the economy where you have some more stability financially. This is why you paid homage to Rome and the god King Caesar at a place like Caesarea Philippi. Play by Caesar's rules, and you might just earn the keys or just purchase the keys to that kingdom, the realm of Rome. And Jesus asks, in the middle of this noise, who do people say the Son of Man is? Probably this is a reference to the human one, or the Son of Man, referenced back in Daniel chapter 7, who was described as the one coming from the heavens to usher in a new age of prosperity, not only for Israel, but for all peoples and nations. In other words, this one was meant to bring about what Rome had long promised and had failed to deliver. Either way, by the time Jesus enters into the scene, the people have spent a long while waiting for someone to usher in a new era on the other side of the empires that had long subjugated and exploited the people. Because Rome was just the most recent in a long line of despotic dictatorships and empires that had gone into the region and had conquered and laid waste to cities and plundered. So Jesus is basically asking, who do people think it is that will break us out of all of this? Could be another way of saying, who is holding the keys of power, really? Who is in charge? Who really makes things happen in this world? And if it's not Caesar or Rome or some other powerful force on earth, then who? In answer to Jesus' question, the disciples begin to share what the word on the street is. And there's always rumor about who is going to break them loose. And there had been people who had led insurrections previously that had been put down cruelly by the Roman Empire. But the disciples answer the question, and they say, word on the street is it was John the Baptist, but that can't be right. He was killed. But still others say Elijah, maybe that was it, or Jeremiah, and we missed it, one of those old prophets. And of course, they're all dead, so what does that mean for us today? And after all, one might wonder, if they were the Messiah, why are things still so messed up after all of these years? And of course, everyone would have been aware that nearby stood a stone pillar with an inscription that read that Caesar was the Son of God. It was even written on stylus in the area, and there was one in that region. Caesar, Son of God, who brought the good news, or the gospel. That's where we get that word. But Caesar's gospel to the Roman Empire, the gospel of Rome for the Romans. But that too was found to be an empty promise. So Jesus reframed the question, saying, who do you say that I am? It's as if to say, what do you tell people about me when you talk about me? And Peter seems to have his answer primed and ready. It's the right answer. It's the Sunday school answer. Hand up, answers correctly. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And you may know by now, this is insurrection talk. This is rebellious talk. Peter just said that Jesus was the Son of God, not Caesar, and he says this on Caesar's turf too. Before we move on, I should say, Messiah means anointed one. And you could be anointed into the role of king, like the Caesar, or prophet, priest, or teacher. And the question becomes, what kind of king, prophet, or priest, or teacher is Jesus, if he is anointed into that role, if he is the Messiah? Because if he's cast in the mold of the king of Rome, then he had better come packing. And what I mean is, Rome has armies. Rome has wealth. Rome is organized. Rome is the dominant culture. So to subvert all of this is going to take armies, wealth, and all the machinations of empire, perhaps a propaganda campaign. But in naming Jesus as the one who will usher in the new era, that's to name, if you've read what Jesus said, it's to name Rome's polar opposite as the one who has the real power. I mean, Jesus has no armies. Jesus has no wealth. Jesus does not have the flash or the grandeur of Rome or those who serve it. And Jesus says that the world he will bring is more lasting than anything Rome can pull together. And Jesus is claiming that the world he brings is not only far more life-giving and endurable than Rome's, but is also fundamentally different. Different values, different ways by which the people live in it. The keys to Rome's kingdom are gained by, you want the keys? Gained by way of violence, idolatrous nationalism. In other words, our country is divine. By way of subjugation and exploitation, all of those ways. But the keys to God's kingdom are peace, love of God, and love of neighbor. That's how you get there. And if we want the keys to this place, we must be willing to throw off many of the dominant assumptions of the ruling powers of any age, frankly. Assumptions like, you must do violence to your enemies if you will survive. Most people probably believe that. Or, you must acquire as much material wealth as you can before you die. And I know people believe that. And Jesus says, no, pray for your enemies and give your possessions to the poor. Jesus' disciples and many others who would follow him later came to believe that Rome's way was the wrong way. That's why they have thrown in with Jesus. After all, they had seen this all play out before. They had witnessed, or at least their ancestors had seen, empires fall, often eating themselves up from the inside. You could ask the question in Jesus' day, where was Babylon, Persia, or the Greeks who had all used to occupy that space? They had even seen the Egyptian empire that they read about, their own exodus from, thousands of years old, seemingly as timeless as the sun and stars, taken over by, guess what? The Romans. Jesus knows that all empires and ruling constructs eventually fall apart, and the people around him know this too by now. Nearly always they fall apart by means of which they were constructed, or as Jesus would put it, those that live by the sword die by the sword, Matthew 26, verse 52. All empires in history who have lived by the sword have by and large followed suit. At least so far, this has been the case. Jesus knew this, and apparently Simon Peter had begun to see this too. So Peter names Jesus as the Son of the living God. And from the vantage point of the disciples and their place in history, this was something you may have missed, but for them this was a powerful and sweeping statement. And by now you could probably understand why, because to say that Jesus is the Son of God would be to demote the Caesar in Rome and to elevate Jesus into his place. In ascribing to Jesus an honorific title that was meant only for the Caesar of Rome, Peter is throwing his lot in with Jesus and claiming that he has the real power, a power greater than Rome's. In choosing the way of Jesus, he is rejecting the violence and lust for wealth that Rome represents, and instead, he's opting for a way of love and generosity. And then, in response, it seems, Jesus renames him Peter or Petros, which means rock. And it could be that Jesus is saying that Peter is just a chip off the old block. Or perhaps he is being complimented as stable and dependable, like a rock. I think that's implied. I think also that what's implied here is that Peter is beginning to embody, along with Jesus, the ways that lead to life. He is rejecting the shaky foundation Rome has offered and has become part of the movement that will be a foundation, a more firm foundation for transformation and freedom for the people. But either way, Jesus says that it is with people like Peter, these rocks, that the church will be built. People who see that the way of Jesus, the way of God, is the direction to take. Peter is given the keys and is told that what he binds will be bound and what is loosened will be loosened. Now this part about binding and loosening is a direct reference to Isaiah chapter 22, an old prophecy by this time, where it describes how a man is given the keys to King David's house or King David's rule, and can therefore bind and loosen laws and edicts in the name of the King of Israel. So somebody turns up in the name of King David and can carry with them that authority and power in a way. Well, in a similar way, Peter is given the authority to bind and loosen what Rome has gotten wrong. What is bound up by the Jesus movement are the oppressive ways of Rome, the death-dealing ways of Rome, and the ways of empires, generally speaking, like Rome. And what is loosened are the chains of the oppressed, and the ways that lead to life are loosened. The living water is set free to flow, the ways of God's realm. And Peter, and those like him, the disciples, have the authority now to strive for the realm of God together with confidence. And today, we have been called to become stones ourselves, building this thing called the church. The church of Jesus casts out into the world a different vision for human prospering. What is this vision? What does God's realm or kingdom look like? What differing vision does Jesus hold up against the rule of Rome and every other exploitative system? Read the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor, the meek, the nonviolent. Jesus' ways were a challenge to Rome's rule, so they killed him. But they discovered that they could not kill his body, the church, the body of Christ, those stones that had come together to make a building. And this is where we come in. What good will it be if we today, in 2023, gain the whole world by way of our lives, energies, and efforts? And for many here in America, this seems to be the goal, our gross domestic product, or the cumulative total of what we have made in a year, should go up and up and up and up. And then we have military bases on every continent, save Antarctica. So there's peace through strength, which was a Roman idea. The irony is, strength in this sense turns out to be an empire's demise. Or as I quoted Jesus as having said earlier, those that live by the sword. I bring all this up because there have been developments during the past half century that alarm me and many others. I'm talking here about the rise of the false religion of what's called Christian nationalism. Basically, it goes like this. God is a bigger, better Captain America. Jesus is almost always white. The flag can often stand in for the cross of Jesus and vice versa. The American flag, that is. Nearly synonymous with the flag in the hearts of many. So keys to this kingdom consist in being a good consumer, racking up credit, paying those bills, and participating effectively in the kingdom's economy, which is hurting people. And all of this is promised us, all of the blessings of the system, by way of incessant military action, endless war making, and we scapegoat any people, group that we feel a threat, creating our own demons to stoke up fear. And the Messiah in this kingdom is any person or political party you think will usher in a new era of prosperity, or maybe even bring back the ghost of the Garden of Eden, that mythic past that never really was so great. I invite you today to join Peter in his confession. Who holds the keys to the kingdom that really matters? Is it Jesus? Did Jesus really embody the ways and purposes of God? Were his words and ways wisdom or foolish, as many today would find them? Is the Sermon on the Mount a bunch of nonsense or a pipe dream? Where he said to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us? Or are they, as I think they are, which is a window through which we might peer into a world that would be if humanity had in mind the things of God? If Jesus asked you which way you would choose, what would you say? What do you say? Who do you say that he is? Answer correctly, and Jesus says you hold the keys to life and everything good. So I'll say it, the way of Jesus, the Son of the living God, is the way to life. The way of love and peace, and the rejection of materialism and idolatrous nationalism, in preference for a way that loves not only neighbor, but those who are difficult to love. That is my conviction, but who do you say that he is? Who do you say that he is? If enough of us answer that question correctly, then we just might be able to see the realm of God that Jesus saw on the horizon. We might be able to see more of it come in our own lifetime and experience the blessings and the fruit of that place. But only if we are able to see that Jesus' ways are better over and against the competing claims around us. So, who do you say he is? I hope that we might be able to see the realm of God come in our lifetime. Join the movement. Let us see it. May it be so. May it be so. May it be so.